Morning, everyone. Welcome to the last study. Now that Melody's here, last study of how to read the Bible for all it's worth. Just remind you on the handout that I gave you the very first week when I did the introduction, this should look a little familiar. Hopefully, it's in your notebook or in your Bible by now that you have memorized. We've been talking about, I don't think I can do it. Genre issues. The best way to read the Bible and any text in the known planet is to first figure out what's the genre of the text. A genre means type or literary type. So we're looking for what kind of type it is. Why? So that we can ask the right questions of the text. I'm elegant, right? I'll just rip this thing off. Okay. I thought I could do it, but I can't. We're asking the right questions of the text. If you ask the right questions, you'll get better answers. You might not know the right answer, but you can get a lot better ones. What does it mean to you that 350 degrees times 16 minutes for that cake? What do you feel about that, Julia? Is the wrong question. Where's the knob is a good question. Historical questions, literary questions, Old Testament narratives, laws, psalms, proverbs, prophets, Gospels and Acts, and letters, and now Revelation. You want to ask the right kinds of questions. So I've given you just big picture overview questions. And then how do I know when to apply the text? If you ask those questions, you're better off every single time. Let's go to the book of Revelation, otherwise known as the Apocalypse of John. So this is chapter 13 in the book. Any questions or comments about anything thus far you want to cover before we get going? No? All right, we're going to cover the entire book of Revelation in 40 minutes. So buckle up. But if you've had my class on Revelation, this should sound pretty familiar, frankly. But again, this is just another genre. Please let me emphasize once again, it doesn't matter what your view of inerrancy, not inerrancy, inspiration, not inerrancy, inspiration. You think it fell out of heaven or you think it picked up on earth, your view of the biblical text. If you know the genre is better, you're going to ask the right questions, you get better at the answer. My own view is that the scripture is the chief authority for faith and practice. And I think the people who wrote the text of the Bible chose the genres on purpose to communicate a message they wanted to on purpose. They could have chosen anything, poetry and biographies and histories, and wrote a song about it. When they said, nope, I want to write it this way for this purpose, they did it on purpose. I think God was very much in that process. And when there's a guy named Jonas, or John, who lived in an island of Patmos, he decided to write a letter to at least 7 churches that lived in Asia Minor, we call modern-day Turkey. And he knew these churches almost certainly. But he was on exile there. He was like being in prison. He decided to write encouragement and challenge to them about how to stay Christians in their world where it's becoming increasingly hostile to them to be Christian. And his current situation was evidence of that. I'm in jail. I'm in exile in Patmos. And he chose to do it in a particular genre that today, in general essence, is a dead genre, which means you can't go to Barnes & Noble and go poetry, cookbooks, geography, apocalyptic. There it is. There's no section like that at a modern library or bookstore at all. At all. That's why we call it dead. No one writes in the genre. Modern people sometimes for fun. There's a book I just saw yesterday, in fact, at Wheaton Bookstore, and it said so-and-so, an apocalypse. So someone, I'm sure a scholar, deliberately decided to write something like it's an apocalypse. But in general, the New York Times won't have a section called apocalyptic works. Well, that's what makes it difficult for us. So Bonnie and I know what a cookbook is. She knows it. I'm sure she's a much better cook than I am. And we know what a sports interview is. Bud knows all about sports, right? In the newspaper, he knows all, and on it goes. We get because we still see it all the time. So if Bud and I were archaeologists and we found an old text that was 2,000 years old and you start reading it and it said, so-and-so took on the blah, blah head forest. They're ranked 7 in the division and da-da-da. Bud's well-tuned eyes and ears would spot quickly, this is a sports editorial. How do you know it, bud? That's what I've spent my whole life doing, and other things. But believe me when I say, if this isn't a sports editorial, I don't know what it is. Is it a cookbook? No, it's not a cookbook. No, look what he's saying. And then they destroyed Dallas Bucks at the book. Yes, man, this is I mean, it'd be so clear as day. And I'll say, Bud, would you come to our church and give us a conference on how to read sports events editorials? Yes, that's all I know how to do. Here's how you should read it. So when they say they destroy them, why would they be so mean to that team? Why do they deserve to die, Bud? Bud said, no, 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 that's called hyperbole. They wrote that way all the time back then. Huh? We need someone who's read that literature, that genre a lot to help us understand their patterns of thought. And that's what happens with scholarship and apocalyptic literature. In the ancient world, many people wrote in what's called apocalyptic genre. But today, only certain people read those ancient works called apocalyptic works. People like me go to PhD, and you have to read these things. In fact, then you read all of them. There's a lot of them. And I had a class of PhD on apocalyptic literature. The first part is one semester. The first half of the semester, so all we did was read portions of or entire works of apocalyptic, everything that's ever written, Jew and Christianity. It was close to 50 or 60 works. And the second half of the class was on Revelation. So you talk about power punk. So by the time you read all the other apocalyptic works that existed, then read Revelation, you go, man, this is easy because you've read it so much. If I read 40 years of Bud's editorials on sports, and then I read one example of Bud, I go, man, it's clear as day. But here's the problem. No one else in the known universe goes and reads ancient apocalyptic works for fun. You wouldn't know where to go find it, I bet. And so, by the time you read Revelation, you think this is some bizarre, and it is, very special. You might even say the word unique. Literature in all the world that came from heaven. It's not. It is not. This is just as normal as history or biography in the ancient world. Just we don't do it this way anymore. And they call it apocalyptic or apocalyptic genre because apocalypsis in Greek, which is Revelation 1:1, that's exactly what it says if you turn to Revelation 1:1. That's the very first word in Revelation. Apocalypsis. Apocalypsis is how they would say it. Revelation 1:1. So your translation probably says the revelation of Jesus Christ. In Greek, it literally just says apocalypse. And apocalypse means that which is revealed, that which is made clear, that which is manifested. Think of like a curtain, and the curtain goes back. What would you call that thing that we now can see that was past the curtain? It is revealed. It's apocalypse. It's revealed. It's unveiled. So in Greek, it literally says revelation or apocalypse, Jesus Christ. And it says, was given to him, God, to show his slave. Anyway, it doesn't matter with the Greek right now. But that's why I use the word apocalyptic genre, because of Revelation 1:1. It's a genre that seeks to pull back the curtain, or a person has been given a vision where the curtain has been pulled back. And all apocalyptic works come down to those two major ways. You're either, I get ahead of myself, but you're either seen a vision of the veil of reality pulled back, or they go on a trip. That's it. So let's look at Revelation right now. We'll talk about that in general. Does that make sense so far to what I'm saying to you? That if you want to read all the other apocalyptic works, you can. Most of them, I think all by now, have been translated to English. And so there's a collection of, you can just read a whole, like Reddish is the classic one. Scholar's name, his last name is Reddish. Reddish, he got a compendium of about 50 or 60. That was one of our textbooks. You can go read them yourself. Some are clear to understand. Some are, you can make heads or tails of it. I mean, they're most bizarre. Anyway, Revelation is a blend of our book, Revelation, is a blend of three different genres. Letter, prophecy, and apocalypse. We're going to unpack all three of those. It's a letter because he speaks to his audience in the form of a letter. He does. He starts out to the churches of Asia Minor. Look in verse 4, 1:4. John to the 7 churches that are in Asia. That's standard epistolary framework or letter framework, which we talked about the last 2 studies. Whenever you say, my name is David, I'm writing to the church of Kimani, and welcome, and God be grace to you. Oh, it sounds like a letter. That means he's writing to actual churches in Asia Minor at the end of the 1st century. Letters are not fairy tales. This would have been a letter that real human beings in modern day Turkey, in ancient Asia Minor, would have, well, they would have been read to them. So that's the first thing is, John is writing to real people in the real world. He's not writing to churches here. He's not writing to America. He's not writing to Europe. He's not writing to the Roman Catholic Church. Not writing to, they don't exist. He's writing to churches he would have known. And he thinks he's a prophet. He writes a prophecy. And all through the text, he'll say things like, to the other prophets. He doesn't think he's John the Apostle. And that's a common misconception. He never calls himself that. He never thinks that he is. If that makes you nervous. Jonas in Greek, John, is a common Jewish male name, so we shouldn't get wrapped up in that. His name was John. We just don't know. It was John the prophet, we'll call him, because that's what we should be called. Anyway, so he certainly is a letter, because it's written to real churches. If you look at the bookends of the document, it sure reads beginning and end. Let me prove that real quickly. At the end of Revelation, not prove it, let me show you again. At the end of Revelation, it's like a sign-off like you would in a letter, because he knows the scroll's going to be rolled up. And that's verse 18. So it's 22:18. 22:18. At the very end of the scroll, it said this, I warn everyone who hears the word of this prophecy, of this book, and literally biblion in Greek means scroll. You can say book, but it's literally scroll. Everyone who hears the prophecy of this scroll, if anyone adds to them, God will add them the plagues described in this book. If anyone takes away from the words of this scroll, of this prophecy, God will take away his share in the tree of life and the Holy Seal, which is described in this scroll. And that's a warning, obviously, to the person who is speaking this message to the churches. So if Jennifer is sent around to read this apocalypse from David the prophet, and she decides to go, you know what, I'm feeling inspired myself. Let me add a few words, that church at Ephesus. Or, he got a little too hard on the Philadelphians. Let me just scratch that part out. He says, curse on you. So it's a letter. Now, why would they do such a thing? Because people did it in the ancient world. They did it in the ancient world. When I gave you, there's no email that went straight to the sender. You had to roll up a scroll that you wrote. You might have spent a lot of money on, or someone else spent a lot of money on it. You gave it to Kathy, and you go, see ya. You hope that what I gave to you is going to make it to the church. If you trust it, if you paid a person you didn't know, there's no guarantee. You have a little more trust. Since I know and trust Kathy, it's probably going to make it just fine. And that's what you try to either have a friend who took your parcel, your mail for you, a friend. If you had to pay for it, And even if it's someone you trusted, what if they got real, quote, inspired themselves? I know what David really meant here. John's like, don't touch it. Just give them the message. And I've heard sermons use that text to say the entire Bible can't be changed. It's absolute nonsense. John is not writing about the Bible. There is no Bible when John writes his prophecy. So this is a letter written to 7 Church Asia Minor. Don't touch my letter, just read it aloud, and that's what we think happened. So it's a letter, it's also a prophecy. Remember, prophecy doesn't mean future teller. We talked about this several times when we went over prophets. Prophets is someone who just speaks for God. A prophet is someone who speaks for God. He thinks he is a prophet. He says in 1:3, right, in 1:3, blessed is the one who reads aloud the words of this prophecy. And you look in 19:10 and 22:18-19, as I said before, he mentions himself alongside us and the prophets. So he thinks he's a prophet. Again, he's speaking to encourage and admonish actual churches in Asia Minor at the end of the first century. It's a word from the Lord. Now, it's true in the book of Revelation, he does speak about some distant things. But if you look carefully, it's only at the very, very, very end of the letter he does so. And even then, we're not convinced they're distant. John seems to think this stuff is right around the corner. It hasn't happened yet. But I personally think, most scholars do, that if you time traveled, I brought John from then to now, or any of the biblical authors, and say, did you think the church will last 2,000 years? I think they'd say, no. I wouldn't use the exact vocabulary, but he does think it's going to happen in a moment. But he writes like a good biblical prophet in the Old Testament, which is, I've got a word from the Lord. You got to change it right now or else. Got to change it right now or else. And third, so it's a letter, it's a prophecy. 3, it is an apocalypse. Let me slow down on that one since the other two we've covered already in classes. The Apocalypse, there are nearly 30 Jewish and Christian apocalypses written between 200 BC and 200 AD. But you can read fragments of even more than that, of which you're aware, and you can read all of them. This genre is so unfamiliar to the non-specialist, it's easily misinterpreted, and that's why I gave you a bunch of analogies of Bud and the sportscasting. If you didn't know about it, you'll misread it. Now, apocalyptic authors used Ezekiel 40 to 48, Daniel chapters 7 to 12, Zechariah 1 to 6, and segments of Isaiah as their primary source for images and symbols, and that is the case. Most Jews and Christians who wrote in that genre went to the same little baby bag of symbols and tricks to describe what they saw, or they were saying they saw. And so you often go back to those passages over and over. Ezekiel, Daniel, Zechariah, Ezekiel, Daniel. And Revelation is no different. Revelation uses them a lot. And the New Testament, beyond the book of Revelation, you have the Mark 13, 1 Thessalonians 4, 1 Corinthians 15, 2 Thessalonians 2, and 2 Peter 3. They have little baby apocalyptic sections where they use apocalyptic imagery and symbols and so forth. And you simply can't fully understand Revelation without understanding the other part. Now, they change the meaning some. They'll take an image and reuse it. So it's not always one for one, but a good place to start is reading Ezekiel 4 to 48, Daniel 7 to 12. It is. Again, there are distinctions, but the literature began in moments of crisis or oppression. And apocalyptic authors kept the emphasis upon judgment and salvation, but postponed those events into the future when all oppression would cease. And so if you go to Ezekiel and Daniel and Zechariah, when it talks about God's going to judge the nations, he's going to do it to that nation. Assyria's going to get it. Babylon's going to get it, and they'll get it tomorrow. An apocalyptic author, a Jew, would go, I'm going to take that same idea that God's going to punish people and there's going to be victory for Israel, but now I'm going to make it global. And it's going to be all oppression going to stop all over and everywhere. So it gets generalized. It gets catastrophized bigger. It gets much bigger. So that's the starting point, but then they reappropriate the images to get bigger. That happened on purpose. 2, genre deliberately uses visions and dreams because there's an otherworldly vision. Like I said before, the author has been revealed a vision of the end times or heavenly realms, and he's got to describe it the best time he can. So it deliberately, this really, well, it helped me years when I first understood this. If you think about it like this guy's trying to describe to you what it's like walking in a dream, or technically we would say phantasmagoria. A phantasmagoria is a very vivid dream where you go from vivid image to vivid image to vivid image to vivid image. That's what John, the prophet, and many apocalyptic authors do. So if you wake up, ever had a really, really vivid image and it's just scene after scene after scene, you wake up and I go, now, Bonnie, write it all down what you experienced. Just the way you did. You say, I can't do it just the way I did, but if you're like a normal person, Bonnie is not. She's super. But just in case for the rest of us, she'd say, well, David, she'd use the word, she would constantly make similes. It was like I saw this, it was like this big ball. It wasn't a ball, but it was like that. But there was a bright white light. It was so, so bright. Did you look? I could look right at it, though it didn't hurt my eyes, but it was like a sun, but it wasn't the sun. And then I saw it, but it was like, and then I saw this, it was like this huge dragon. And it chased this woman, but they're like stars, like a constellation. But it chased in the dragon, and she gave birth to a child, but it wasn't a child, it was a man, but it looked like a child. But I felt it was a child, but it was a grown man. I saw a man, but I felt, oh, that's a child. And then Bonnie, did you drink anything before sleep? Are you on any medications? She said, not more than normal. But God gave me this message. That's what we get the feel deliberately when John wrote Revelation, what we call the Apocalypse of John. You have to keep remembering constantly, particularly around chapter 4, because the first part's different, but around chapter 4 particularly, but there's some section in chapter 1. But if you'll remember, if you have my Revelation class, then things he says, John, come up here. I want to show you something. So I said all apocalypses, I did a paper on PhD in Revelation. They all, either you go on a vision or you just go on a trip. Come, let me show you around. Or you just have a vision of something. John has a little both. But when he gets to come up here part, now he's able to, as it were, walk. It's still a visionary state, but it's as if someone's guiding him. And in Revelation is an angel shows him this and shows him this and shows him this. It's episodic. It's the chronology doesn't really matter. It's all over the place, but it's like a dream. Um, the last thing about the genre of apocalyptic is that it deliberately, I cannot just, I mean, you need circle, square, star, deliberately uses symbolism, metaphors, numbers, wild images to maintain this otherworldly experience. It does not like to describe things at face value, like a law does. Do not murder. What do you think that means? I know exactly, don't kill them because of spite in your heart and unlawful, don't do that. Biography is different too. This deliberately likes hyperbole and numbers and symbolism. For example, Revelation has images of a beast with 7 heads and 10 horns, 13:1. Now, in scholarship, we know exactly what he meant by that. And what he did not mean by that was a beast with 7 heads and 10 horns. That's not at all what he meant by that. A woman clothed with the sun, 12:1. Locusts with scorpions' tails and human heads. And this goes on and on and on and on. So a little quick summary to give you a little, as on my footnote there. Numbers and their combinations, this was common, and the Greeks did this, Romans did it, and Jews did it too. Numbers can represent things, they signify things. Like 3, typically in Judaism, typically represent in the realm of the spirit, that is God's living active spirit. It can imply some completion, like in Revelation 16:13, 3 can. Like 3, Father, Son, Spirit, completion. 3 and 1/2 is incomplete. It's perverse. It's evil. Because 3 and 1/2 is half of 7. So it's not fully 7. 7 is also completion. I go on for a long time. 10, 4 is often representative of anything earth, like the 4 corners of the earth, or all encompassing. That's why there are 4 living animals before the throne. They represent the 4 corners, and it goes on and on. 10 represents an indeterminate amount of time, and the greater the multiple of 10, the longer the time is. So if it's 10 years versus, say, 1,000 years, but that's 3 groups of 10. 10 times 10 times 10. 3 is the whole number, and 1,000 equals a long time. And if it's more than that, it's a really, 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 really long time. So, but again, nobody in scholarship reads that and go, okay, 8, 9, 10. And next, no one does that. It's a symbol for a length of time, an indeterminate amount of time. Symbols signify things like beasts always equal nations. Always. And in Revelation, it almost always represents one nation, and that's Rome. And if you assume that, it makes sense of so much. It just does. So many things fit perfectly in place if you assume Rome. Why? Because he wrote this while Rome had imprisoned him in Patmos. And the people of Asia Minor were under Roman occupied. If he wrote this during in the middle of the 20th century in France when the Nazis took over, and he goes, there's a beast with 1 head who spews all kinds of wickedness against the Jew. I wonder who he's talking about. And anyone picks it up is a no-brainer who they're talking about. Hitler, dummy. I mean, dummy. And he's talking about Nero. And everybody knew it. People groups can be nations, beasts, people groups. Horns or heads almost always equals authority or rulers or leaders. Anything that's loud is not just a pastor or your mother, but a voice or a noise. It means authoritative, strong. A loud voice came out. Colors signify things all the time. White equals victory or purity. Red is conflict or war because of blood. Black is lack of something, famine, sickness, pestilence. If something is gray or ashen, it can be death or sickly. I mean, you got to go down the line. So you have the 4 horsemen. They all have different colors. So back to the top of that page, this is the tip that helps save you if you believe me so far. If not, okay. But this is at least standard. I find this very, very persuasive, having studied it for years. When interpreting Revelation, pay attention to how the image makes you feel rather than analyzing every part. Pay attention to how the image makes you feel rather than analyzing every part. Because analyzing every part is like explaining why a joke was funny. It just ruins the point. My children think that often when they have to tell my mom, when she goes, what? Why was that funny? And Joey goes, oh, Mom. That's a pretty good, Julia. Oh. Is that pretty good? Close? Close? You're welcome. Oh. Oh. Julia taught me the meaning of the term disgust. I never knew it until I saw her face. She went to a cocoon for about a year in her room. When she came out, I learned what disgust was. I love her though. I love her. No, seriously, right? So if we explain it like a joke, it's kind of funny. We do the same thing. People do. Oh, okay. If you go, what does the beast mean? It's like parables, the same thing. It is. You miss. The father runs and grabs the son. He just hugs him. My boy's home. Kill the fatted calf. Oh, if you understand what's going on, you go, oh my goodness, and you're crying. You're like, you go, okay, let me explain this. See, Jews in the ancient world, that's like saying his dad's dad when he took his inheritance, and his dad. Men don't run back then, and so you ran. Oh, well, that's every single lesson I've ever taught on a Sunday morning. But by the time you unpack it all, and that's a lot of times why I've inverted it through the years here at Hill Church and all through my ministry. There are times I want to explain ahead of time and then read it. I'm trying to get you to read it and feel the impact, and there are times I do the opposite. I'm not sure I'm perfect every time how I do that, but there are times I deliberately invert it. Like, can I give you context first so when you hear it, you feel it better? Because it's an orator skill that they're trying to get at in the text most of the time. But Revelation's difficult to do that until you've done a good study of it for a long time, and then close all the study books, as it were, and then read it again, or listen to it on the audio Bible. Then you can know what's going on, what he really meant by that. And it's kind of fun, like wink, wink, we know who the beast is. We know who that horn is, wink, wink, what's Nero. But now I can feel it. I can feel the overwhelming presence of that. And that's difficult, because it's a dead genre. We're not used to reading it. That's all. Another little encouragement to you is, having done this through the years, that people of all kinds of educational backgrounds get to this book and throw their hands up in despair and say, I'm never reading this book in my life. It just makes no sense to me. Can't put heads or tails of it. My encouragement is, that's normal. Please don't give up. You start somewhere by doing studies like this, having good study Bibles, and that helps you at the bottom. Just understand it's not weird if you think it's weird, because it's just a different way of reading it. I want to pause there before I talk about an overview. Any question or comments about describing? Yes, ma'am. Describing Revelation. Good question. Is that all? So is apocalyptic always negative, like a war or whatnot, or is there a positive outcome? The answer is it's always all or nothing, and it always include. Now this has been years in my PhD class. I don't know if every apocalyptic work always has both, but most do. Most have, if not all. I know Revelation does. Those two components get combined. I'll say in colloquial English, the bad guys get beat up, the good guys win. It's a standard comic book ending. And apocalyptic makes everything binary. That's one of the ways in scholarship we say this is apocalyptic, because it is absolute binary. You're either darkness or you are light. You're either all bound straight for hell or you're going to be with Jesus forever. There's a constant either orness to it. And that includes destruction and death for the bad guys, and then the good guys are going to win. And apocalyptic works tend to like to describe how bad the bad guys will get it. They do. There was another, probably so that the good guys go, oh yes, it feeds in her. I hope they burn forever. And you killed my mother. And another apocalypse. A little footnote. I mean, I go on forever and ever because I teach a class. An apocalypse. I don't mean to go on forever, but an apocalypse of the apocalypse of John took a long time to be canonized. That is included in so-called inspired texts of the scriptures in the Orthodox Church until about the 8th century. They didn't put it on. They went back and forth for about 800 years of whether or not they wanted the apocalypse of John in their Bible. Almost 800 years. They preferred a different apocalypse, the apocalypse of Peter. And one of the reasons seems to be because in the apocalypse of Peter, there's a lot more vivid description of what happens. They are tormenting in hell and burning and on and on and on. But they had different visions of that. So it depends on the church you went to, whether or not you wanted to hear them burn. But more that you asked and all that. But yes, they do. It's all or nothing. And it's typically bad with some good for the good guys. And that's the call. The battle call is to encourage those to stay faithful. Stay faithful. They're going to get it. Justice is coming for them. Stay faithful. Stay faithful. Revelation is no different. He'll say, I used to know the number. I don't know, 26 times or something. Whoever has ears to hear, let him hear. This is a call to the faithful, a call for the be faithful. He says it over and over. He says the call to endurance of the saints. You've got to stay true. And he makes you wait for it over and over until he finally gets to chapter 21. Then all of a sudden, now we see what we've been waiting on. And then I saw a new heavens, a new earth. What about apocalypse? X-Men Apocalypse is pretty accurate. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, technically speaking, yeah, apocalyptic. There are apocalyptic themes in modern comic book Marvel or comic book genre. Yeah, a clear bad guy, like the old Superman comics. Not so much now. We try to have the twisted, like the Captain America. The good guys are really the bad guys, and they're really with Hydra or whatever, and all. No, but anyway, the old school it was bad guy, and that's apocalyptic literature is always that way. Yes, man. Yes, sir. Bud, did you have something? That's correct. So back on page 1 where it says John considered himself a prophet, he was not an apostle. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Like I said earlier, that there's no evidence that the John who wrote this document is John the apostle. There's no evidence for it. It could have been, logically could have been, if it was John the apostle, he would have been very old by this point, like in his 90s, which would have been amazingly old for this time period. The average life expense at this time may be 60s if you have a good long life. So 90s would have been like Methuselah to them. So it's very unlikely that it's John the Apostle for that reason alone. But the main reason is he never calls himself that. He considers himself a prophet, not an apostle. Two, most early church fathers didn't think this was written by John the Apostle. Some eventually thought, they started lumping them together, but early church historians didn't think so. They could all be mistaken. It could be John the Apostle, but there's no reason to think that. Yes, sir. Like I said, John was if I remember, it was something like the fifth most common Jewish male name around there. It was a common Jewish male name. We also have John who wrote John 1, 2, 3, John, right there. He calls himself there John the Elder. I, the elder, write to you. He calls himself the Elder. And so, and this gets complex, but some people might think that John the Elder is also the prophet here. Some think that John the Elder is the same John the Elder who either wrote or under his authority was written the Gospel of John, but scholars debate all that all the time. The problem is the name John is just common, right? It's just a common name. So it might be two or three different Johns in our Christian heritage. John the Apostle, John the Elder, John the Prophet. They might be three different people. Yeah, we just don't know for sure. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to most people. It might matter to you. I've met people for whom it matters a lot. If it's not John the Apostle, why even believe it? I've heard that. I don't find that persuasive at all. Because my response is because the text doesn't say that. See, but I'm different though. I mean that. I'm different. I don't, as far as I can help it, I don't come to the text with my mind made up. I come to the text because I think it's authoritative. So if it never says I'm John the Apostle, my question would be then why do you think that? And they're going to say something on the lines of, because I've heard and read, I've had dialogues about this. But if it's not the apostle, then it's not authoritative. He's not. You got to be apostle of Jesus or else. To which I'd say that's fine. But where did you get that from? A Bible verse? Is there a Bible verse that tells you have to have that view? And they're going, no, it's just my view. Okay, I mean you can have your view. Just I don't find that persuasive. I think it's persuasive because it's in the text. He is a prophet of God, and I will listen to it. He called himself Timmy. I mean, what difference does his name make to me? But respectfully, we have different views. But certainly in scholarship, no one cares if this is John the prophet or John the elder or John that they care, but not for authority purposes. But some do. For some, it's a big, big deal. So my only point right now is to be real clear one more time before we move on. When I said not an apostle, I'm being very clear. I mean in the document, when he calls himself John, he never assumes or says that he is an apostle. In fact, when he even references the apostles, he says the apostles, not us. So I'm talking about within the document. He never says, I used to travel around in Galilee with Jesus. Like Peter assumes that, right? 1 Peter, particularly, he'll say that, and 2 Peter, he'll say, I was with him. The transfiguration. Well, that's different. Now, maybe he's delusional or a liar, but that's what he says in the document. Here, he never says he's an apostle. So good. Hopefully that's helpful. Anything else about that? So these are just overview of this. And at the very end, I'm going to give you some books you can go read for further inquiry to help you. Okay, here's the other thing, is that understanding time. Apocalyptic literature, I still say that too quickly sometimes. is not concerned with giving a detailed chronology, contrary to nearly every popular interpretation. If you're a dispensationalist, it is. If you follow John Nelson Darby, if you've ever used or heard the word rapture, premillennial, postmillennial, amillennial, you've been taught dispensationalism. That's a kind of reading these texts. If you want, we can talk about that some, maybe in a moment. Maybe if we have time at the end, I'm happy to talk about that. If you're a dispensationalist, you do read these texts that way, and that is okay, and they might be right. Every scholar in the world disagrees with them, and I'm one of them. Because in the genre of apocalyptic, when you read all the other apocalyptic works, you realize they do not care about that. That's not how visions and dreams work. And every interpretation I've seen that tries to force revelation into a schema, to me, does not persuade at all. And this is standard. I'm not saying therefore it's true, but this is standard scholarship. You can have your own view. So my view is that this is like a vision. So in fact, I like Charles Talbert. The next part is an outline. Charles Talbert was a professor. He's since died. He was one of my professors at Baylor and PhD, and he's the guy that taught me the class in apocalyptic literature. And I disagree with him a lot, but on this one I agreed with him a lot, so I like his book and his outline. And Talbert and others came up with an analogy because that was one of his specialties. Revelation is like a multifaceted diamond or an object you keep turning. I'm going to describe it this way, and then I'm going to turn it, and I'll describe it another way, and I'll turn it again, describe it this way, and I'm going to turn it. You're describing the same event from different ways of getting at it. And technically speaking, in the ancient world, that's a literary little feature. It's called recapitulation. It's when you restate something a little different way, but you're talking about the same event. And I'll describe this here. So the first part is like that letter I told about, the prophet's call and the letters to 7 churches. So that's a prophetic letter. Then in chapter 4, things change a lot. Now he's going to give 7 visions describing the same shift of the ages. And if you read it that way, in my view, it makes a lot of sense. And so you have an opening scene in heaven, then you have the 7 seals. He gets all the way to 8:1. So just real quickly, go to 8:1, and you'll see that he does this. If you go to 8:1. And then 8:1, he says, when the Lamb opened the 7th seal, there was silence in heaven for about half an hour. And that's just because the angel needed a pee break, right? Thank you for laughter. So, okay, and clock. Now, that's what anybody does who doesn't know apocalyptic literature. They go, what happens in 30 minutes? I wonder what happens in 20. Why wasn't it 29 minutes? 28. When you read apocalyptic literature, you go, no, you've misunderstood completely. That's like asking what butterflies in your stomach. The point is 30 minutes is just a short blink of a time. But there was a pause and quiet. Now, why is it quiet? Silence probably because, this is a long story, but I'm getting somewhere else, because there was a common Jewish belief that right before creation, it was completely silent. And so it's a way of saying there was an absolute silence, like primordial silence. But look in verse 2. Then I saw the 7 angels who stand before God, and 7 trumpets were given to them. What? You've been going seal, 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 6 seal, 7th seal, and new world, new heaven, what's going to happen to the victorious? And he goes, he backs up. And then I saw angels out 7 trumpets. No, I don't want to hear trumpets. What happened after the silence? And that's what he doesn't want to tell you yet. He wants to give you the same thing. So if the first time the seals he's emphasizing tribulation, especially towards Christians. Then 8:2 to 11:18, he does it again, but with 7 trumpets, tribulation, especially towards Christians. And then there's like a long sermon. He talks about the source of tribulation. It's Satan through Roman domination. And then at 14, tribulation, especially toward non-Christians. You have the 7 angels of judgment. Then the next one, another scene, tribulation, especially toward non-Christians. You hear that? You see this parallelism. And then you have a long sermon, Romans 17 to 19. And then the final consummation. And if you look at this outline on your free time, which I encourage you to do, go look this up and you'll see, make up your own mind. Like, David is not persuasive. That's fine. But here's a way to read it. I find the best way to understand it I've ever read in any of my work on this. I think this does make the most sense. And if you want to read more of Charles Tarbert, if you look at the bottom of the page of the whole handout, I say for more read Charles Tarbert, The Apocalypse, or Reading of the Revelation of John. It's a short book. It's gray. It's probably 20 something dollars on Amazon. I think it's still in print. I mean, it's like 150 pages. It is a tight read. It's not a huge monograph. He loved to pride himself in writing with fewest words possible. So I think it's one of the great, Ben Witherington's work, Ben Witherington, the third Revelation's a good one. So there are numerous good works on that will read it in context and then explain things to you. So what's the purpose of Revelation? Two chief purposes that most scholars think. One, it encourages Christians to keep their faith in the face of suffering, which is on its way. Like I said before, hold on, keep the faith, don't give up. When John wrote his book, persecution had commenced, but it was not that bad yet. There was one martyr, one person who had been killed for his faith in Revelation that he alludes to. And then there's a few more a little bit later on. He'll say, then the martyrs below the throne were saying, oh God, how much more? We're crying out for vengeance. And he goes, just a little bit longer. So it has happened, but it's not a full pogrom, or pogrom means, if you don't, a legal sanctioned persecution. And that will happen. That happened in the 70s, this is probably written then, late 70s when Nero was there, and then certainly when Domitian was there about 30 years after that. And they got full on killed. And his view is, hold on. It also encourages Christians to stay pure. That is to say, don't be a pagan. Don't live like the nations. Don't give into the sinful culture. You've got to stay pure. When suffering comes, don't go, I give up. This is too hard to be a Christian. I'll just go live with sinners. And the whole document constantly emphasizes to Christians, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that. You might be tempted to blend in because the suffering is bad, but don't do it. And one way he does that is particularly in that Revelation 17 and 19 when he says, he gives this long, the Babylon is displayed on this big dragon, that's Satan, and she's a harlot, she's a whore, she's a prostitute, all naked and gross, and she's got wine, and she's drinking off the blood of the martyrs. And so the beast, Rome, has fueled this lust-driven, nasty, it's a stereotypical Jewish understanding of the Gentile world, but it's this really amazing, grotesque, disgusting picture if you're a Jew or a Christian. If you're a good old Roman, you go, yeah, baby. All right, it's ride the waves, let's do this. But that's not what they believe. You've got to hold on. That beast will be destroyed. And that's why he gives this long story. He's chained up. God takes a chain and down to hell and chains it up. And so you got to hold on. Okay. We still got about 4 or 5 minutes. So good. Any questions or comments about anything at all in life? Certainly Revelation. And if it's real difficult, I'll just say Marcus, come up here and help you out. Yes, ma'am. The Lamb, chapter 8. Got your Revelation chapter 8? Uh-huh. I'm looking right now. Yes, ma'am. Good question. Your translation might. Yes, so literally in Greek, it is when he opened. It is when he opened. That's right. Yeah, so what translation is that of yours? NIV, that's right. But the he is referencing Jesus, who's called the Lamb in chapter 7. Does that make sense? That's okay. If you look in verse 17, the Lamb is Jesus, yes, ma'am. And that's right. And that's right. That's right. And it's fun. It's not funny. They're very, very clever images. In John of Patmos, Revelation is more vivid with his symbols. I think most scholars concur with this, than any other apocalypse ever known. He is full of them. It's amazing how much. But the idea of a wounded lamb on the throne of the cosmos, amazing. He's the lamb who takes away the sins of the world, right? According to John the Baptizer at least. So this image of a wounded lamb who also has thrown, he has what we in English call a crown, a diadem crown. So it's the royalty crown. So this image of a wounded lamb that's all wounded is now ruling over all people. But if you're a Christian, you go, whoo, that's good stuff. Because that's the one who died for me. We know it's Jesus, but he never says Jesus. God is not going to ride on a white horse. Well, I don't know if he will, but in Revelation, there's the image of Jesus doing that. Yes, ma'am. Oh, gotcha. It's not really a white horse. So this is a good. So my view, this is seriously good. Every time someone asks me, so it's not really going to happen that way, I always go, maybe, because I don't think I'm ever omniscient ever, and I don't think I know about everything about anything, and so my response is maybe, but I don't think so. So for me, for me, I can get closer if you said, David, do you think John thought Jesus was literally going to fly on a white horse? I would say probably not, but then I'd still say maybe. That's different from will he do it? Oh, authority? So at minimum, John, in my reading, is that John is absolutely trying to evoke an emperor. Yeah. Yeah, who run on the white, the biggest long white ones were reserved for the wealthiest and most powerful people most of the time. So for him to come on a white horse, anybody in that time period, we might say a Rolls Royce, Lamborghini combo. I mean, we'd go, whoa, who is that? Or we might say, frankly, like the presidential limo or something, whatever that comes down the road. That's a big, someone really, 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 really authoritative. And maybe the most authoritative person in the country is in that limo. They would have done the same thing with the way he's described. Absolutely. But did that mean John pictured it literally would fly out of the heaven around the horses? He might have. I just don't think that's the point he's making. I think he's trying to evoke the most authoritative is going to come and squash, and he will come squash. And there's no war, if you read Revelation, there's no battle, there's no Armageddon. Armageddon and is two Aramaic words. It means the mountain or hill of Megiddo. There is no hill or mountain in Megiddo. I've been there. Megiddo's a valley. It's as flat as can be. And so he's talking about a cosmic scene of the forces of evil get together, and then this one of the horse goes, and it kills them with a sword in his mouth. He just judges them; they're dead. I mean, there's no battle. We're going to mute it. So yeah, and he ends the text. Jesus is never, ever, ever, ever threatened. There's no scary war. Every time the bad guys come to do something, you're dead. The first time he sends out fire from heaven. The second time, well, that's the first. No, that's second time. Then yeah. Good. Any questions or comments about that? Anything else? Anything? Well, I hope at least piques your interest. If you go on Hill Church's Facebook page, if you look under videos, I have a playlist. I think it's still there. If not, I'm happy to help you. There's a playlist, I think, when I taught Revelation here 3 years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, and I went through, it was about a 6-week study on that, and I'm happy you can just watch it, and if you have any questions or comments or profound disagreements, let me know. Let's talk. Teach me your ways. I want to get it right, believe me. So I mean it. I mean it. I mean it. If not, let me say a prayer for us. Thank you, Lord Jesus, for the opportunity once again to try to understand your scripture well. And I think I can speak for all of us involved when I say we are very grateful that you will ride on whatever it takes to make sure that the world sees how victorious you are. You are the chief authority. Please help us surrender to you as the chief authority. God, the real struggle, it seems to me, is us. The real struggle is our own heart and mind, not wanting to give up any part of our lives that's maybe pleasurable, fun, or whatever it is if our ego gets in the way. So help us, please, not be part of the people you will find to judge now or when you come and return in great majestic splendor. Help us be part of those that have endured, that have stayed faithful. In the meantime, Lord Jesus, would you help us interpret your text well, ask the right questions of the text, and frankly, simply not give up. Not give up, not throw up our hands up in despair, but try our best day in and day out to go back in baby steps in the right direction, reading your text devotionally, to let it seek inside of us and soak inside of us and simply transform us, that we're more like you because we've done it. Not merely as an academic exercise, but in the real world of our behaviors and our thoughts and our feelings, we manifest you in everything we do. Please help us. We love you. Thank you for loving us.